I have wanted to make this video for over a year now, but it always felt too big, too serious, too unserious at times that I kept pushing it back. I kept shelving it lest I get it wrong. And truthfully, right around the time I decided to finally sit down and write it, Yara Zaid put out a brilliant video on the matter, which is now a year old, and I thought nothing else needs to be said on the subject of Lolita. This is it. In fact, the video essay realm is swimming in these videos. You have the cinematic offering by Lola Sebastian, which I have watched and rewinded about 1 billion times. You have newer videos that tackle Lolita in the publishing industry and Lolita at the movies, and these videos really solidified my stance. Nothing else needs to be said about Lolita. But I reread Lolita anyway. I read a few essays on it too, and one really stuck out to me. It was the introduction to Lolita in the Afterlife, written by Jenny Milton Quigley, and she states, "The evolving, newly charged conversation around Lolita could and should be encouraged on all sides, thoughtfully curated and preserved. And it needs to be done now. Despite floating in our mind's eye for the past 66 years, Lolita endures. It's an infection, a fever you can't sweat out, to quote the guy with the big forehead. Lolita is like a spell that can't be broken lest you speak its name." So, here it is, the Lolita video. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lolita. How could anyone ever publish a book about Lolita? Well, like this. Boomers want to talk so much about cancel culture today, when this book, a book with fewer sex scenes than one Euphoria episode alone, nearly killed them in the 50s. Back then, Lolita was a phantom hanging over the heads of American publishers. No one wanted to risk being that publishing house who unleashed this debauchery on the public. It was too raunchy, too controversial, too obscene. For instance, a publisher at the Viking Press emphatically denied Vladimir Nabokov's request of publishing with him, stating, "We would all go to jail if the thing were published." And forewarning, I really do apologize for the way I say Vladimir Nabokov's name throughout this video. Not only am I American, I'm Southern too. We have our own language here. The truth is, Lolita is a controversial novel. When it was finally published in America in August of 1958, it planted a seed of discourse that would last generations. The concept of this old murderous geezer falling in love with, see also grooming and assaulting, his 12-year-old stepdaughter isn't easy to read about. In fact, it's downright depressing. But it does make for great literary scandal, and in turn, great commercial literary success. Lolita became an instant bestseller upon its release, catapulting up the New York Times bestseller list within a month. Next to Gone with the Wind, it was one of the first novels to sell 100,000 copies within 3 weeks of its publishing. This book was a huge deal, even back then. And it never stopped pissing people off. Catherine White wrote for The New Yorker in 1955, "I don't suppose anyone like me, with 5 potential nymphets in the family, would not find the book uncomfortable." Orville Prescott for The New York Times called Lolita repulsive, highbrow pornography. Stephen Metcalf took it a few steps further, writing in 2005, "Lolita is a disgusting book. Furthermore, the day will never come when it is not a disgusting book." Clearly, Stephen has never known the epic highs and epic lows of Pinterest or Tumblr or, God forbid, a Lana Del Rey album. The best Lana Del Rey album, by the way. In the past few decades, and probably well before that in the private minds of those without internet access, Lolita has morphed into something certainly not disgusting, at least in the public eye. Never mind the endless reviews of calling it one of the last great love stories of the previous generation, Lolita became something of an icon. Depending on who you ask, it turned into a way of dressing, a way of being, and a way of reclaiming. It not only became an aesthetic, it became an identity. The Nymphet hashtag, the Coquette queen, the dozens and dozens of reviews for authentic Dolores Haze, aka Lolita fashion. All of this overtook the public perception of who Lolita is and what she looks like, at least in Western thought. When I speak here of the Lolita archetype, I'm speaking specifically of that idealized Americana, baby doll dress saturated, heart-shaped glasses phenomenon. There is a Japanese subculture by the same name, which I won't be talking about in this video due to the amount of T.O.E submissions I got begging me not to. To my knowledge, and based on those comments, the Japanese subculture is not affiliated with the book other than by name. Also, tangent related, but does anyone else remember when Bradley Cooper was photographed reading Lolita to his then girlfriend, 21-year-old Suki Waterhouse, when he was pushing like 40? Because the South remembers. Also, Suki, we don't know each other, but I'm in love with you. Please call me. Robert doesn't have to know. So when we talk about Lolita, we inevitably talk about polarity. Depending on who you ask, it's a brilliant book with a captivating protagonist, that is, Dolores Haze. Or it's a disgusting book with an irredeemable monster, that is Humbert Humbert. It's both and it's nothing. It's complex and it's simple. It's political and entirely apolitical to its core. Lolita is Herculean. So much so that no matter what side we look at it from, pop culture just doesn't get it, which makes my job a lot harder. I love summering! Sorry, girl. I was getting stressed out. You should get a drink too. Let's make this the perfect hangout. And if you don't have a drink handy, boy, have I got the hookup for you. Which bottle do you want? I got all of these from Cellars, which is the sponsor of today's video. They're perfect for hangouts like this. Let me tell you something. I know nothing about wine, but every now and then, my friends love to gather here and they want to unwind. Girl, we play a movie or a board game and we sip on our favorite little drink. Sometimes any bottle from any grocer will do, but wouldn't thou like to live deliciously? Cellars believes that finding wine that you love shouldn't be difficult. It should be fun, it should be exciting, and most of all, it should be welcoming to newcomers like me. Traditional wine culture can be intimidating to newbies. Think of all of those wine tasting jokes where the person is able to discern like 80 different notes just from swishing their wine around in their little glass. I can't do that. But Cellars makes finding the perfect wine for you 10 times easier, no matter your status. You start by taking a personalized 7-question quiz to find your taste profile. From there, you can choose from 12 different plan options and over 100 varietals sourced from 80+ wine regions around the world. And that's just a fancy way of saying, girl, you've got options. And your chosen wines come right to your door, making it easier to sit back and relax and enjoy the company of your guests. My favorite part as an essayist is the educational aspect of Cellars. Each box comes with these thoughtfully designed wine cards that tell you the various taste notes, serving temperatures, origins, and possible food pairings for your wine. See for yourself why Cellars bottles have over 600,000 5-star reviews. Thank you to Cellars for giving my subscribers their first 6-bottle subscription box, which is usually $150 plus, for just $55. Click the link in the description to take the quiz and get started today. Supporting my sponsors directly supports me and all of the things I do here on my channel, so make sure to check out Cellars, and let's get back to, oh god, the misery. First, let's start with a brief summary of Lolita. Evil man Humbert, obsessed with children, marries a woman in order to get closer to her prepubescent daughter, Dolores. Literal war crimes ensue. Whenever I make an offhand reference to Lolita in my videos, speaking specifically to the ways it's used to justify infantilization of women, I usually get the same comment. Did you even read Lolita?
Did you read about your mom?
Yes, I read Lolita. When I talk about the way Dolores is morphed into the image of a sultry, nymphetol icon, I'm not talking about the novel itself, but the iconography peddled by pop culture. When we think about Lolita today, we think about the aesthetics of the subculture, which is bolstered by studios, replicated by social media, and absorbed by so-called romantic literature. But these vibes aren't actually congruent with the novel. So how did we get here? Lola Sebastian, the original source for every Lolita video ever, made an interesting point about this in her video. Our misunderstanding of Lolita comes not from our misreading of the book, but from the numerous additions to the, let's call it, Lolita universe that are not faithful to the source material. An example would be the movie adaptations of Lolita, but seeing as we still have an ongoing writer's strike here in North America, we won't be talking about that today. Solidarity, Godspeed, you know the deal. Is it possible movie adaptations obliterated from our minds to misread Lolita in a way that turns it into the romantic, sultry image pop culture renders it today? Like much of what we're going to cover here, I think the answer is both yes and no. The novel doesn't inherently romanticize its storyline or its characters, at least in my opinion. But it is easy to get lost in Humbert's prose. Lolita is an idealized world full of dichotomies. Describing the hotels he stays in with Dolores after he kidnaps her, Humbert says that these hotel rooms are prison cells of paradise. He calls the relationship between him and Dolores a paradise whose skies were the color of hell flames. Humbert is in the business of making ugly things sound beautiful, either to assuage his guilt, if he has any, or to stoke our sympathy. After all, he writes this memoir while in prison awaiting trial, but he dies before the trial starts. If we want to be pretentious about it, which we're going to be, we're the only jury Humbert ever faces. The point is, Lolita is a charming novel. Humbert, despite being a pentapod monster, is a superficially charming man. Through his descriptions of that old, forgotten Americana, ice cream sundaes, roller skates, and movies, it's very easy to get sucked up into the aesthetic world that Lolita provides. And that makes it easier for us to lower our guard around its main villain. After kidnapping Dolores, Humbert writes, "In the gay town of Leppingville, I brought her 4 books of comics, a box of candy, a box of sanitary pads, 2 Cokes, a manicure set, a travel clock with a luminous dial, a ring with a real topaz, a tennis racket, roller skates with white high shoes, field glasses, a portable radio set, chewing gum, a transparent raincoat, sunglasses, some more garments, swooners, shorts, all kinds of summer frocks." This passage makes up the entire iconography of our modern Lolita, nymphetol extraordinaire. But the other half of that sentence, beyond the aesthetic of the frocks and the big, great American summer, what does that say? Humbert continues, "At the hotel, we had separate rooms. But in the middle of the night, Dolores came sobbing into mine, and we made it up very gently. You see, she had absolutely nowhere else to go." This passage comes after Dolores finds out that her mother is dead, and that her stepfather, who has already begun abusing her, is the only adult left for her to depend on. The book is full of these dark, sobering moments, placed delicately and deliberately right after long, winding passages of wit and beautiful prose. It catches you off guard. It makes you want to push the book back in disgust. So let's say then that Lolita is not an idealized romantic novel that pop culture makes it out to be. It can't be contained within aesthetic niches because it's too big, too dark to be reduced to a Pinterest board. It's a disgusting novel, as Steven pointed out earlier. It's a pedophile training manual, as one parent described it. All of those earlier reviews, those condemnations, maybe they were right. So this aspect of Lolita is probably a bit easier to digest. It's a novel from the point of view of a pedophile. Of course it's going to be disgusting. Humbert has a way of describing something beautiful and then making your skin crawl right after. He lingers on the reality of Dolly's childishness. He calls her monkey-like and smelly. She doesn't shower often, as little kids don't, and she picks wedgies out in full view of everyone. She picks her nose absent-mindedly. She's a kid. In fact, further into the book, Humbert calls her a typical kid, almost the exact opposite of his earlier definitions of a Nymphet, that being a non-human, demoniac siren. For some reason, the running idea in pop culture, at least pop culture of the past, is that Dolores is the catalyst for her own abuse. Her exploitation is less sad in the eyes of certain readers because Humbert says she's seductive. Humbert says she's a manipulator. Humbert says that she's the one who tainted his poor, old, emphasis on old, helpless soul. Never mind the fact that it's in Humbert's best interest to tell us all of this, of course. Another sect of viewers deny this image of Dolores and state that it's her childishness that makes the novel all the more disgusting. Humbert's not abusing a nymph at all. He's abusing an ordinary kid, a kid that could be yours or mine. The book is realistic, and that's what makes it disgusting. But even these arguments don't quite get it. I'm of the belief that due to Humbert's unreliable nature and his insistence on constantly validating his own sins, we can't say for certain that Dolores actually came onto him. We can't even say whether she liked him at all. But the better point would be, it doesn't matter whether she did or she didn't. The exploitation of either Dolores, that be the supposed nymph fatale or the plain typical kid, can't be justified. As Lola says in her video, it's not the job of the young girl to avoid being abused. It's the job of the adults surrounding that young girl to protect her from abuse. And Dolores is heart-wrenchingly unprotected. She doesn't need to be a perfect victim in order for this book to be a disgusting recount of abuse. But another question is, does the disgusting acts in the book make it irredeemable entirely? Should we lock this up, refuse to let it out, and never speak of Lolita again? One parent thinks so. Especially disturbing is it being on a list of approved reading for high school students. I just don't know what is wrong with people that think this is okay. I don't care how well written this book is considered to be. I wouldn't recommend it to any age, she says. And that's fair, to each their own. I'm not gonna sit here and say, let your child read Lolita or you're going in the bad parent box. But I also think that it's not as simple as condemning the book entirely and hoping that the bad stuff within it goes away. While reading Milton Quigley's anthology, I came across an essay by Tom Bissell, who states, as a story, Lolita comes to our mind preheated by cultural osmosis. It cannot be read cold. In other words, Lolita doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are endless young people who understand the ways in which society views them and predates upon their sexuality. Being told to put on longer pants when male relatives come over, being catcalled as a young teen, being constantly asked or hinted about to sex. These were all very common experiences for me growing up, and this remains a truth in our culture, regardless of whether Lolita was published or banned or never written at all. Susan Choi points this out in her essay, Badge of Honor, by stating that the power of a young girl directly correlated to her attractiveness to older men was self-evident to me then. It remains self-evident to young girls today, whether or not they have read Lolita. I was primed to not merely accept its story, but to recognize it and aspects of myself within it. The chord was struck on those strings that were already tuned. Humbert tries to add charm to these hard truths of the novel. He tries to make it seem as though he's special in the sense of predating upon Dolores. He says he loves her, he doesn't abuse her. But it's clear that Humbert and the novel itself are as ordinary as dirt, to let Claire de Detter tell it. And that's perhaps what we're so scared of when we read Lolita. There are endless numbers of Humberts out there, hidden behind their charm, protected by their status. No one suspects Humbert of being so horrible because he's somewhat polite, educated, relatively powerful, and white, and a man. The novel doesn't shy away from reality, and it ends on a note of understanding that the themes present throughout the book are so alienating, so violent, that is akin to murder. This anthology features a number of essays written by people who relate to Dolores' situation. People who have been abused, people who have been thrust into the unwelcome limelight of sexualization at a young age. The authors of these essays see themselves in Dolores, and they use the novel Lolita to come to terms with the ways in which they themselves were being abused. Bindu Bazanath, for example, became interested in reading Lolita after her uncle, culturally, not familially, began molesting her. She saw the ways in which the book was categorized: crime, drama, romance, and she was confused. Until then, it never occurred to me to consider my relationship with my uncle under any of those genres. That anyone could think us a romance nauseated me, while crime and drama seemed overblown. But reading Lolita changed Bazanath. Just as Dolores did in the book, Bazanath became vocal about her uncle's abuse. She told him how perverted and wrong it was. Eventually, this gave her enough courage to speak to others about it, and she was able to help in getting him locked up. Lolita exists in pop culture, not as an influence on that culture, but a confirmation of it. Young people who are sexualized at a young age, who are lusted after by older men, who know what it means to be a Dolores Hayes. Some of them feel recognized between the pages of Lolita. It may even feel like an act of reclamation to absorb her into their personality. Robin Given argues, Lolita, when taken up by adult women as a public identity, can be a declaration of strength. The fascinations, frivolities, and lusts of girls deserve consideration and respect. But again, we don't exist in a vacuum. This novel doesn't exist in a vacuum. I wonder, in what ways are we able to balance these two narratives? I think writing it off as a disgusting book that should never be read or taught about does a disservice to the important message within it, that is, the needed protection of children. The foreword of Lolita is interesting. It's written by a fictional psychologist, John Ray Jr., and reveals more about the underlying narrative than Humbert does. The end of that foreword states, "Still more important is the ethical impact the book should have on the serious reader. For in this poignant personal study, there lurks a general lesson about potent evils." Lolita should make all of us, parents, social workers, educators, apply ourselves with still greater vigilance and vision to the task of bringing up a better generation in a safer world. It may be tongue-in-cheek, this foreword. Perhaps it's just Nabokov's way of immersing the reader in this fictional world, but it's also sobering. It's real to us now, and it should have been real to the adults then within the narrative. Lolita is important and vividly true, and I think it needs to be presented alongside open, honest, and critical discussion rather than it being locked away or romanticized to death. So, if Lolita isn't a bad, horrible, no good, disgusting book worthy of being banned, and it's also not a romantic, seductive book worthy of being aestheticized, what's it trying to say? Dear Shakespeare, dear Shakespeare, dear Shakespeare, dear Shakespeare, dear Shakespeare, you've got mail. Welcome to the T.O.E section, where I ask you questions about a video topic and you write in with answers. God, there are so many helicopters. The other day, literally 3 days ago, because I forgot to do this before I finished making this video, I asked you what you thought of Lolita and the impact it's had on pop culture. And clearly school is in session and every single one of you is trying to procrastinate something that has much more value than this because you answered a lot. Let's hear some submissions. Lux writes, I'm glad I picked up the book. I picked it up for the wrong reasons. I wanted to be Lolita. But in the end, it made me realize the severity of my own abuse, and I hold it dear to my heart till this day. It's a very controversial but amazingly written novel. to me. This next anonymous submission comes from a viewer who partakes in the Nymphet Coquette aesthetic, and they state, I see my romanticization of Lolita as an ode to girlhood, and for the little girl I never got to be. In the Coquette, Nymphet, Dollette, girly community I'm in online, the romanticization of Lolita comes from most of the people, guys and girls and non-binary people, who struggle a lot with the same kind of stuff, such as loss of childhood to abuse/trauma, teen years lost to shame and fear, young adulthood lost to mental illness, body issues, overall scared of womanhood/adulthood, trying to find comfort in feminine pleasure and girly aesthetics/hobbies. And I know that the romanticization of Lolita gets a bad rep, and for good reason, but it happens for a reason, even if it isn't very politically correct of us. One anonymous user stated, I think overall, Lana Del Rey has played a part in how young girls perceive Lolita, and thus made the disturbing things portrayed by Nabokov seem cute and attractive. And that one was in reference to Lana's music and her aesthetics, such as the heart-shaped glasses and so forth. Another viewer actually spoke about Lana's history with the Lolita aesthetic, stating that she had real experiences with older men, so maybe she's just talking about her experiences. Through the power of music. One user wrote about the novel, the way Lolita was turned into a love story really just shows how ready we are to exploit and sexualize minors. There were a lot of submissions that mirrored each other, stating that as survivors of assault and CSA, the book was too triggering for them to read. And a lot of other viewers chimed in and said that the novel is impossible to adapt into visual mediums and should be, I almost said kept in the closet, and should be kept in the realm of literature and not film. Another submission states, I was a teen on Tumblr at the height of the aesthetic Lolita/Lana Del Rey Nymphet blogs, and it really did a number on my developing brain. I feel bad for Nabokov that his book got so grossly misrepresented, and I feel bad for the young people who are still being affected by the romanticization of what is, in my opinion, a horror story. The trend in book covers going against Nabokov's wishes to not feature a girl on the cover says it all. Lastly, Anonymous states, while deeply difficult to read, I think Lolita is also incredibly powerful and important, and its commentary still rings true in the 21st century. The ways in which it has been misinterpreted and misappropriated are a great tragedy. We have culturally failed Lolita over and over again for the same reasons Dolores Haze was failed. If you want to read more opinions on Lolita, you can find hundreds of comments under the latest post on my community tab. A lot of you also recommended the podcast by Jamie Loftus. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm hoping to check out that podcast soon, and if you're interested, definitely give it a shot. But let's get back to the main video. More and more uncomfortable did Humbert feel. It was something quite special, that feeling. An oppressive, hideous constraint, as if I were sitting with a small ghost of somebody I had just killed. Alongside its earlier mentioned themes, Lolita is also a novel about murder, not just when it comes to Humbert getting dripped out to go kill Claire Quilty, but something deeper than that. He shot that man 19 times and he still survived somehow. He survived for a few seconds, but you know, still enough for me to get suspicious. Lolita is about the murder of Dolores Haze, 12 and typical, by the pentapod monster Humbert, old and ignorant. While reading Lolita, it's impossible not to notice how little we learn about Dolores. Humbert can go on for pages about the minute details of the American hotel. He can list off from perfect memory the items and toys and food that he brought for Dolores. He knows what the skin of her shoulders looks like, what bow she's wearing at any given moment. But a startling realization that we the readers have, somewhere at the beginning of the second part of the novel, is that we know nothing about her interior life. When she brutally learns the news of her mother's death, we know that she cries later in the night and every night afterward. But that's it. We know that she finds Humbert disgusting after their first intimate encounter, that she even goes as far as naming his abuse. But he blurs the edges and makes us wonder, is she being serious? Humbert obfuscates Lolita and other characters like her because he doesn't see her as a person. He sees her as a means to an end for his own selfish desires. This was also true of his first wife, Valeria, of which he states, "She had acquired a queer restlessness, even showed something like irritation at times, which was quite out of keeping with the stock character she was supposed to impersonate." Likewise, Lolita is an empty void. She's a stock character that Humbert creates for his own selfish fantasy. What I had madly possessed was not she, but my own creation, another fanciful Lolita, perhaps more real than Lolita, overlapping, encasing her, floating between me and her, and having no will, no consciousness, indeed, no life of her own. The most interesting thing about the way Lolita is written, despite Dolores being silenced, is that there are still glimpses of how she feels and what she thinks about in regards to what's happening to her. Humbert sprinkles in brief mentions of her reluctance. She often says, "Oh no," whenever she realizes that he's asking her for sex. Her surprise is unfeigned when he tries to kiss her for the first time, and she tells him not to do that he's a dirty man. Dolores' silence in the novel is significant. Disappointing for first-time readers, I'm sure, but significant. It makes what Humbert did to her more palpable. Her silence is something he can't charm away. He can't manipulate us into brushing it off or ignoring it. Humbert has systematically and wholly annihilated Dolores to the point where whole pieces of her voice are not present in a book that's named after her. That's the project of Lolita, to show us what has been destroyed. This is another aspect of Lolita that reinforces its reality. There are entire scores of people who are made to be silent by those who have hurt them, and that silence feels like a kind of death, which is incidentally a fear of Dolores's. She tells her friend with Humbert eavesdropping in the background that dying is scary because you're all alone. And being silenced in the way that she was, that has to be the loneliest existence in the world. In my grown-up reading, Lolita's cipher-like presence throughout the book, her silence, seemed apt not just from a literary standpoint. It felt real. It felt like an evocation of my experience as a girl moving through the world. Nabokov denies our attempts to do anything so crude as identifying with a character, but I had this strange experience of identifying with the silence. Lolita is complicated. Both a noun and an adjective, Robert Gibbon states, both oppressive and freeing. It's at once an anti-romance novel and a romantic gesture towards America. I often think about it as a companion piece to the 2014 novel by Caroline Kepnes, You. Joe Goldberg and Humbert are scarily similar. Both deny the harm they cause women, both claim they aren't monsters, both disparage their partner when they're no longer in control. I mean, even down to their dialogue and situational prompts. They're the same. Humbert writes, after Charlotte finds his incriminating diary, "Let us be civilized people. It is all your hallucination. You are crazy, Charlotte." Joe writes after Beck finds his incriminating box, "Stop imagining things, Beck. You're talking crazy like you'd leave me." Humbert writes of Charlotte, "She said I was her ruler and her god. She said Louise had gone and let us make love right away. She said I must forgive her or she would die." Joe writes of Beck, "If I had a folding TV dinner tray, I would hurl it at the window and pound my chest like a barbarian, like a thick-dicked alpha gorilla."
But what?
Well, at the very least, Humbert is what Joe thinks he sounds like in his head. The point is, You was written to mock our cultural depiction of romance, not support it. Neither Joe nor Humbert are meant to be seen as heroes. It gets lost easier on screen, as evidenced by the commentary surrounding both adaptations of these novels. And perhaps it also just gets lost through Humbert's winding prose as well. But one thing is for certain, at least to me, pop culture doesn't understand Lolita. But I really hope it keeps trying to.
Take a chance to
Nabokov. Or is it Nabokov? Wait, that actually reminds me of one comment that I got when I asked what people thought of Lolita. Someone just said, it was just okay. European American classic literature. It's just okay. They're right, and they should say it.